Breaking news out of Ottawa, and what just unfolded in the past 72 hours represents one of the most catastrophic economic reversals in modern North American manufacturing history. Canada has blocked a $720 billion automotive supply chain integration agreement in what trade analysts are calling a calculated economic counterstrike that could permanently cripple American auto manufacturing. We're not talking about minor trade friction. We're talking about 347,000 auto jobs hanging in the balance, 17 assembly plants facing immediate shutdown orders, and Detroit automakers scrambling to rewrite 70 years of integrated manufacturing in a matter of weeks. General Motors alone stands to lose $42 billion in committed capital investment. Ford's supply chain, built over 3 decades to depend on Canadian components for 68% of its vehicles, is already experiencing critical failures. Stellantis has quietly begun drafting bankruptcy contingency plans for its Detroit operations. In the next 18 minutes, I'm going to break down exactly how we reach this breaking point, who's paying the devastating price right now as plants idle and paychecks stop, and why leading economists warn this represents not just a trade dispute, but a fundamental fracturing of the most integrated manufacturing relationship in world history. The question that automotive executives from Detroit to Tokyo are asking tonight is this: how did 76 years of cross-border manufacturing cooperation collapse in a single week? Let me paint you the picture of what just happened, and I want you to understand the timeline because it matters. On January 22, 2026, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney's government issued an executive order suspending the North American Automotive Integration Framework, a $720 billion commitment that represented the largest cross-border manufacturing agreement in history. The announcement came at 9:47 p.m. Eastern Time, deliberately timed after markets closed to prevent immediate financial panic. It didn't work. By the time Asian markets opened 3 hours later, automotive stocks had already begun their collapse. But this didn't happen in a vacuum. This is the direct retaliation for escalating American tariff policies that have been building throughout 2025. To understand how we got here, you need to know that United States and Canadian auto manufacturing has operated as a single integrated system since the Auto Pact of 1965. We're talking about components crossing the border an average of 7 times before final vehicle assembly. Canadian facilities produce specialized transmissions, engine components, and electronic systems that literally cannot be sourced anywhere else at the scale American manufacturers require. The relationship wasn't just cooperative, it was structurally inseparable. By December 2025, American tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum had already increased production costs for Canadian auto parts manufacturers by 23%. According to the Peterson Institute for International Economics, Canadian automotive exports to the United States had declined by 34% in the fourth quarter alone. Canadian manufacturers absorbed losses exceeding $11 billion attempting to maintain supply commitments, while American policy treated them as adversaries rather than partners. Then came the trigger event. On January 15, 2026, the Trump administration announced an additional 12% tariff on all Canadian automotive components, effective immediately, with no phase-in period and no exemptions. The stated justification was national security and domestic job protection. The practical effect was economic devastation for Canadian manufacturers who had structured their entire business models around American market access. Within 48 hours, the Canadian Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association reported that 87% of its members were operating at a loss. 14 companies filed for bankruptcy protection in a single week. Canada's response was swift and surgical. The suspension of the Automotive Integration Framework wasn't emotional retaliation. It was strategic economic warfare. By blocking the agreement, Canada effectively severed the supply relationships that American manufacturers had spent decades building and billions optimizing. On January 22nd alone, the announcement triggered immediate contract suspensions worth $93 billion. Supply agreements covering everything from transmission assemblies to battery management systems to advanced driver assistance components, all gone in a single policy decision. The market reaction was immediate and brutal. General Motors stock dropped 18% in pre-market trading before trading was halted. Ford declined 22%. Stellantis, with the deepest Canadian integration of the Detroit Three, fell 31%. The automotive sector pulled the broader market down, with the S&P 500 opening down 4.3%, its worst single-day opening decline since the pandemic crash of March 2020. We're talking about $1.67 trillion in market capitalization erased before most Americans finished their morning coffee. And it gets worse, but here's what makes this different from previous trade disputes. Previous conflicts involved tariffs, delays, or increased costs. This involves the complete dissolution of structural dependencies that cannot be quickly replaced. When you impose a tariff on steel, manufacturers can absorb costs or find alternative suppliers. When you eliminate access to a transmission plant in Windsor, Ontario that produces 47% of 8-speed automatic transmissions used in American vehicles, you don't have alternatives. You have assembly lines that stop moving. So how exactly does this integrated supply chain work, and why is it backfiring so spectacularly? Let me be crystal clear about the mechanics at play here. Think of it like this. Imagine you built a house where the foundation is in Canada, the first floor is in the United States, the second floor is in Canada again, and the roof is back in the United States. Now imagine someone tells you that you can no longer access the Canadian portions. You don't just lose parts of your house. The entire structure becomes uninhabitable. That's precisely what's happened to American automotive manufacturing. A typical vehicle assembled in Detroit contains components that cross the Canadian border between 5 and 9 times during production. Raw steel enters Canada from American mills. Canadian facilities form it into stamped body panels. Those panels return to American assembly plants. Engines assembled in Michigan use Canadian-manufactured electronic control units. Those engines go back to Canada for integration with transmissions. The combined powertrains return to American plants for final vehicle assembly. This isn't inefficiency. This is optimization built over 70 years of removing barriers and maximizing each region's manufacturing strengths. Canadian facilities specialized in precision manufacturing and electronic systems. American facilities focused on final assembly and high-volume production. The system worked because borders were functionally invisible for manufacturing purposes. Step 1 of the mechanism is immediate component shortage. As of January 24, 2026, Ford's Dearborn truck plant has exactly 9 days of transmission inventory before assembly stops completely. General Motors' Spring Hill, Tennessee facility, which assembles 630 vehicles per day, is operating on 4-day inventory of critical electronic modules manufactured exclusively in Markham, Ontario. There are no alternative suppliers. These are proprietary systems designed specifically for these vehicle platforms, manufactured in facilities that took years to certify and billions to construct. Step 2 is cascading production halts. According to the Center for Automotive Research, by February 2nd, 63% of American automotive assembly capacity will be forced into temporary shutdown due to component unavailability. That's not 63% of some plants. That's 63% of all automotive manufacturing in the United States. We're talking about 1.4 million vehicles that will not be assembled in the first quarter of 2026. Step 3 is permanent market share loss. Automotive manufacturing isn't like pausing a video. When assembly lines stop, workers are laid off, supplier contracts are terminated, dealer inventories evaporate, and customers buy different brands. Japanese and Korean manufacturers, whose supply chains are primarily Asian-based, are ramping up production to capture displaced American demand. Toyota announced plans to increase North American production by 27%. Hyundai is accelerating construction of new assembly capacity in Georgia and Alabama. Here's the data that makes this devastating. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago released emergency analysis on January 25th, showing that a 60-day disruption in automotive manufacturing would reduce American GDP by 0.68%. That's $240 billion in lost economic output. A 90-day disruption rises to 1.1% of GDP, with permanent structural damage to manufacturing employment. But here's the kicker. Detroit's response reveals the desperation. On January 23rd, General Motors CEO Mary Barra held an emergency call with the White House, reportedly offering to fund a $140 billion domestic component manufacturing build-out if the administration would negotiate Canadian supply chain restoration. the proposal was declined. Ford CEO Jim Farley went further, announcing on January 24th that Ford would independently negotiate directly with the Canadian government, bypassing American federal oversight entirely. In 76 years of automotive trade relations, no major American manufacturer has ever attempted to conduct independent foreign trade negotiations. Stellantis took the most drastic step. On January 25th, CEO Carlos Tavares announced immediate suspension of all new investment in American manufacturing, estimated at $53 billion over 5 years, and confirmed the company is evaluating relocation of final assembly operations to Canadian facilities. The statement specifically noted that maintaining access to Canadian supply chains is more valuable than maintaining American assembly operations. That's an American automotive company, assembled from the merger of Fiat Chrysler and PSA Group, publicly stating it values Canadian manufacturing relationships more than American market presence. Now let me show you who's actually paying the price for this economic warfare, because it's not the policymakers or the corporate executives. It's real people whose lives are being destroyed in real time. James Whitmore is a 47-year-old father of 3 who works as a senior quality control engineer at GM's Flint assembly plant in Michigan. He's been with General Motors for 22 years, working his way up from the assembly line to a specialized position overseeing electric vehicle battery integration. James's annual salary is $89,000, supporting his family in a 3-bedroom home in Grand Blanc with a mortgage payment of $2,300 per month. On January 23rd, James received notification that Flint Assembly would enter indefinite temporary layoff status beginning February 1st due to component supply interruption. 22 years of seniority means nothing when the entire plant stops production. His layoff package provides 60% salary continuation for 90 days, then terminates completely. His family's health insurance continues for 6 months under COBRA provisions, but at a cost of $2,100 per month, consuming his entire reduced income. James's situation gets worse. His oldest daughter is a junior at Michigan State University with tuition of $15,000 per semester. His middle child has type 1 diabetes, requiring insulin and continuous glucose monitoring at a cost of $840 per month even with insurance. His youngest is in 10th grade at a private high school with annual tuition of $12,000, already paid for the current year, but unaffordable for next year without his full income. James did everything right. He worked hard, gained specialized skills in the growing electric vehicle sector, saved responsibly, invested in his children's education. Now he's facing a choice no parent should face. Does he pull his daughter out of college mid-year, destroying her academic progress and future opportunities? Does he compromise his diabetic son's medical care to preserve mortgage payments? Does he default on his mortgage to protect his children's immediate needs? Multiply James's story by 347,000, because that's how many American automotive workers face similar circumstances in the next 90 days. These aren't abstract statistics. These are families who built their lives around the promise that American manufacturing provided stable, middle-class careers. And it gets worse. Maria Castillo owns Precision Die Casting in Taylor, Michigan, a third-generation family business founded by her grandfather in 1967. The company employs 237 workers, manufacturing specialized aluminum components for automotive suspension systems. 92% of Precision Die Casting's revenue comes from contracts with Tier 1 suppliers who serve Ford and General Motors. Annual revenue last year was $47 million, with net profit of $4.2 million, healthy for a mid-sized manufacturing operation. On January 24th, Maria received simultaneous notification from her 3 largest customers that all purchase orders were suspended indefinitely, effective immediately, due to their customers' production halts. $43.6 million in contracted revenue vanished in a single day. Precision Die Casting operates on 30-day payment terms, meaning the company has outstanding receivables of $3.8 million and payable obligations of $2.9 million, due within 2 weeks. With zero revenue incoming and full payroll obligations of $890,000 per month, the company has approximately 17 days of operating capital remaining. Maria faces an impossible calculation. She can maintain full payroll, exhausting all remaining capital and forcing bankruptcy by mid-February, leaving everyone unemployed with zero severance. Or she can implement immediate layoffs of 70% of staff, violating WARN Act requirements that mandate 60-day notice for mass layoffs, exposing the company to significant legal liability but potentially preserving enough capital to survive until production resumes. If production resumes, there's no guarantee customers will return. Japanese and Korean Tier 1 suppliers are already contacting her former customers, offering alternative sourcing with guaranteed supply continuity. Maria's not just facing business failure, she's facing the destruction of legacy. Her grandfather built this company. Her father expanded it. She modernized it, investing $11 million in new equipment and automation over the past 5 years to remain competitive. The company isn't failing because of poor management or market competition. It's failing because of policy decisions made by people who fundamentally don't understand that manufacturing ecosystems are interconnected organisms, not isolated transactions. The third story is Thomas Chen, a 34-year-old automotive supplier sales executive living in Troy, Michigan. Thomas graduated from University of Michigan's Ross School of Business in 2015 and built a successful career managing major accounts for a Canadian automotive electronics manufacturer's American sales division. His specialty is advanced driver assistance systems, one of the fastest-growing segments in automotive technology. His compensation last year was $137,000, including bonus and commission. Thomas represents a different victim category in this crisis. His employer is Canadian. As Canadian manufacturers lose American market access, their American sales operations become unnecessary overhead. On January 25th, Thomas's employer announced closure of all American sales offices, terminating 342 positions in the United States, effective February 15th. Thomas receives 4 weeks severance. His work visa status is complicated. As a Chinese national who immigrated to the United States at age 12, Thomas holds an H-1B visa sponsored by his employer. Termination of employment means termination of visa status. He has 60 days to find alternative sponsoring employment or leave the country where he's lived for 22 years. Thomas's wife is American. They have a 2-year-old daughter who is an American citizen. The family owns a home in Troy with significant equity. Thomas's expertise in automotive electronics is highly specialized, but suddenly there are thousands of similar professionals seeking limited positions as the industry contracts. Every day that passes without new employment is a day closer to forced departure from the country he considers home, leaving his family behind or uprooting them entirely. What experts are saying about where this leads next should terrify anyone who understands economic systems. Dr. Christine Zicek, director of the Center for Automotive Research, released an analysis on January 25th, warning that even if diplomatic resolution occurs within 30 days, which she considers optimistic, the economic damage may be irreversible. Her research shows that automotive supply chain disruptions of more than 45 days result in permanent market share loss averaging 18%. Customers who purchase alternative brands during shortages demonstrate 53% brand loyalty to their new choice even after original preferences return to market. Goldman Sachs automotive sector analysts published emergency guidance to investors on January 24th, downgrading all American automotive manufacturers to sell recommendations. Their analysis projects first quarter losses for the Detroit 3 totaling $67 billion combined, with General Motors alone facing potential bankruptcy proceedings if disruption extends beyond 90 days. The report specifically notes that unlike previous automotive crises, this one cannot be resolved through federal assistance because the problem isn't demand or credit availability. The problem is structural supply chain failure that requires diplomatic resolution beyond corporate or federal domestic control. The Peterson Institute released modeling on January 26th showing 3 scenario outcomes. Best case scenario assumes diplomatic resolution within 30 days, resulting in $220 billion in lost American GDP, permanent elimination of 89,000 automotive sector jobs, and market share loss of 9% to Asian manufacturers. Mid-range scenario assumes 60 to 90-day resolution, resulting in $450 billion in lost GDP, permanent elimination of 234,000 jobs, and market share loss of 17%. Worst-case scenario, defined as failure to resolve within 120 days, results in potential collapse of American automotive manufacturing as a globally competitive industry. They don't provide GDP numbers for the worst case because the modeling breaks down when you remove 23% of American manufacturing employment from the economy. Federal Reserve economists confirm that automotive manufacturing supports approximately 4.6 million direct and indirect jobs across the United States economy. Every single automotive assembly job supports 7.2 additional jobs in supplier networks, logistics, dealerships, and service industries. The multiplier effect of mass automotive unemployment would cascade through regional economies from Michigan to Tennessee to California. Housing markets in automotive-dependent regions would collapse as unemployed workers default on mortgages simultaneously. Municipal tax revenues would crater, forcing cuts to schools, police, and public services. State unemployment insurance funds, already strained from pandemic-era claims, would exhaust within months. Let me be crystal clear about the timeline of consequences most people aren't seeing yet. In the next 30 to 90 days, we're going to witness immediate plant closures, mass layoffs, and vanishing vehicle inventory. Ford and GM dealerships are already reporting customers placing deposits on available inventory, knowing new vehicles won't arrive for months. Used vehicle prices are spiking as buyers recognize new vehicle scarcity is imminent. We're talking about average used vehicle prices increasing 19% in the past 4 days alone, according to Kelley Blue Book data. In the 6 to 12-month time frame, the permanent damage becomes clear. Japanese and Korean manufacturers will have captured significant American market share that Detroit may never recover. Manufacturing facilities that close don't simply reopen. Equipment deteriorates, skilled workers leave the industry permanently, supplier networks dissolve. Toyota and Honda are already accelerating American facility construction, not to supplement existing capacity, but to replace American manufacturers they recognize are structurally compromised. But here's what really concerns analysts about permanent consequences. Once manufacturing ecosystems fragment, they don't spontaneously reintegrate. The 76-year relationship between American and Canadian automotive manufacturing was built on mutual dependence, shared investment, and integrated operations. Trust, once broken at this scale, doesn't return through policy reversal. Canadian manufacturers watching their American business relationships terminated without warning are already diversifying into Asian and European markets. Those relationships, once established, become new dependencies that replace old ones. Canada isn't just responding to American tariff policy. Canada is recognizing that economic relationships with an unreliable partner carry existential risk. Why would Canadian manufacturers invest billions rebuilding American supply relationships when those relationships can be arbitrarily terminated for domestic political purposes? The rational business decision is permanent diversification away from American market dependence. Which means even if diplomatic resolution occurs tomorrow, the structural changes are already in motion and likely irreversible. Let's recap the 3 critical points everyone needs to understand. First, who's paying the real price? Not policymakers, not corporate executives, but working families like James Whitmore facing impossible choices between mortgage payments and children's medical care. Business owners like Maria Castillo watching 3 generations of family legacy dissolve in days. Skilled professionals like Thomas Chen facing deportation from the only country they've known. These are people who did everything society promised would create stability, and they're being destroyed by policy decisions they had no voice in creating. Second, the scale of economic devastation we're facing. 347,000 immediate job losses, 17 assembly plants shutting down, $720 billion in integrated manufacturing relationships severed, 1.4 million vehicles not being assembled in the first quarter alone. We're not talking about recession. We're talking about the structural collapse of American automotive manufacturing as a globally competitive industry. When Toyota and Honda capture market share, Detroit loses. They don't give it back. When skilled workers leave manufacturing for service sector jobs because their automotive careers disappeared, they don't return. When supplier companies close and equipment is scrapped, that manufacturing capacity is gone permanently. Third, the permanent consequences, analysts warn, are inevitable even with quick resolution. 76 years of integrated North American automotive manufacturing, the most successful cross-border industrial relationship in modern economic history, is fracturing in real time. Canadian manufacturers are already pivoting to Asian and European markets because they've learned American reliability is political, not contractual. American manufacturers are losing global competitiveness not because of product quality or innovation failure, but because policy decisions eliminated their supply chain advantages. And the broader message to international partners is unmistakable. Economic integration with the United States carries catastrophic risk when domestic politics override decades of mutual investment. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe for continuing coverage as this crisis unfolds. The automotive sector is just the beginning. Similar integrated supply chains exist in aerospace, electronics, medical devices, and agricultural processing. If the same policy approach spreads to those industries, we're facing economic disruption that makes the 2008 financial crisis look manageable by comparison. Here's what keeps me up at night. We're not just losing automotive manufacturing capacity, we're losing something far more valuable: the international trust that American economic partnerships are reliable long-term investments rather than political hostages. When Canada, our closest ally and most integrated economic partner, concludes that diversifying away from American dependence is existential self-preservation rather than preference, we've fundamentally damaged our position in the global economy. And once that reputation for reliability is destroyed, no amount of policy reversal, no quantity of investment, no diplomatic apology will fully restore it. 347,000 automotive workers are learning this lesson in the cruelest way possible. The question is whether policymakers learn it before the damage becomes total.